Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mechanical Muse Live, or should I say Kapla. I am wearing my Klingon business casual tonight. I love this shirt simply because Klingon business casual is such an insane concept that it makes this a especially fun Star Trek shirt. But anyway, welcome to Mechanical Muse Live. We're going to have lots of great things to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about building adventures in Cool Name RPG. We're going to talk a little bit about using DTRPG for print on demand, which is the way that we're going to be printing Cool Name RPG. And we've printed our other World of Ataltus books, almost all of them, which is how I have experience in the other area. And then we're also going to be talking about Sweet Tooth, which is a television show on Netflix, a streaming show that I never thought I was going to watch. And yet I watched it and I couldn't believe I hadn't watched it sooner. And I'm very disappointed to all my friends out there that you didn't turn me on to the show before now. So let's go ahead and get started. So mail call. Sadly, it's another week with no mail call, and that's a huge bummer. So I have nothing cool to show you tonight. What I do want to remind everyone is that this is the last show until the first week of April. I'm going to be out of town starting next week for the rest of March, and I won't be back until April. Let's see, what's that? April 4th. So I'll be back on April 4th for a show, but it's going to be a little quiet around here until then. So when we're finished here, I'll be posting all this to Kickstarter as well, so everybody knows. But that means that in general, things are going to go a little bit silent for a while, so don't be too surprised by that. So some of the things that I want to talk about here, let me just take a look. I've got all sorts of stuff to share with you guys today. Oh, I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about stock art again, because this was the thing that came up time and again after last week's show. A lot of people asked about this. Most folks didn't realize just how cool the stock art is that's available right now. And I'm only talking about I'm not only talking about DTRPG, but that's the place you should start from. And the prices range from somewhat pricey, and this is not pricey at all for art, but like $20 for an image to almost nothing for an image, right? I mean, where you can get a package of images for $12. This is amazing art. Now, it's not going to be the perfect art if you're trying to build a brand, but if you're trying to put out that really cool adventure that you always wanted to release, this is the way to do it. Or if you want to put out just a cool setting and you're not looking to build it into something more, but you just do sort of a cool one shot, again, this is an amazing way to do it. There's no reason to turn to AI art, quite frankly, because you're going to get better art that's more focused and that is much cooler and that supports the people who made all the games that we've been playing up till now. So let me give you just a couple of examples. That's the thing I wanted to do, is share just a few small examples with you. Let's start here. So look at this gorgeous stuff, right? I mean, this is absolutely gorgeous, an amazing piece of art. This is by Forrest Immel stock art. Now, this is one of the more expensive ones, which is why I'm starting with this, but it includes 96 portraits, right? And it includes 16 high-res full-body characters. That's a lot of art. It's $200, but if you think about the budget for a book, $200 is going to get you a single character portrait under normal circumstances if you were to contract someone. And maybe not, that depending on the artist, that might not even be what you get. It might be just a face up portrait, right? Or chest up portrait. So that's some amazing stuff. But then here, look at this from Storm Cook, absolutely amazing stuff. Another one from Poet Parole stock art, just a very cool image I found just by looking through it today, just sort of looking through. Some great clip art if you need just like simple black and white images for those little spot art, we call them, down in the corner. Another piece by Eric Lofgren, who's absolutely an amazing artist, has a ton of great stuff on there. Another one, see, it's not just fantasy either. If you're looking to do your fantasy book, I mean, your science fiction book or your cyberpunk, it's all there. And part of why I'm showing this to everyone is that with Cool Name RPG, I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of people building their own stuff. And I want to make really clear some of the amazing resources that are available to you. On top of this, they also have things like templates that you can use, Photoshop templates for using your pages and your backgrounds, full color cover art. I mean, there's a ton of stuff there. And none of this stuff is all that expensive. $10 for this. I mean, it's absolutely an amazing, gorgeous piece by Eric, and it's stuff that you should check out. So I just wanted to give a few more examples of that. Now, in addition to those, I want to give you one more example here. We'll come back to this in a minute. There's not just the stuff on DriveThruRPG. I mean, there's some pretty amazing stuff available on it's like Adobe stock. Now you have to tell it that you don't want the AI stuff, but look at this. This is gorgeous. This is a gorgeous piece I got from Shutterstock years ago. And I mean, what an incredibly cool image for any game that you're making, right? I mean, how cool is that? And then I've got another one here too that I used at one point when we were doing just some little side projects. Look at this, a nice abandoned village, right? How cool is that? You could write an entire adventure around this. You could map this out and present it to folks. So I beat this drum quite a bit, but I just want to say again, look at what's out there. There's some amazing stuff by amazing people, folks who are doing the actual games that you've played in the past, done the cover art, done the interior art. They're out there doing great stock art today. So enough stock art talk. Let's jump into some discussion of Cool Name RPG. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple things. I have a surprise topic that I wasn't going to talk about, but I'm going to bring up because in our weekly game, this is sort of our game roundup, right? I told you I'd tell you how our game is going. We're still playing Cool Name and will be for the foreseeable future. But we pulled out these. Now, these you may or may not be familiar with. These are the Inaros cards from the world of Aetaltis, okay? They are available on DriveThruRPG, and this isn't just a sales pitch. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. Let me show you here. So here are the Inaros cards on DriveThruRPG. They're divine inspiration cards is what we call them. We call them for shorthand Inaros cards because they represent the Inaros, the gods of the world of Aetaltis campaign setting. So I want to share this because a lot of the folks who backed Cool Name RPG are also fans of the world of Aetaltis. So these cards you can get on DriveThruRPG. You can get the print version for like $9.99, and that's the print plus the PDF. It's really pretty affordable. I think it's like $1 to add the plastic case if you order them. Each of these cards features one of the Inaros of Aetaltis. And for example, this one says Lense. Well, I'm going to start with Droth instead. Droth is the Inaros of war, and this one reads, "The armies collide with a crash like thunder, audible all the way down to Elsindor. The air fills with the ring of steel on steel, the hiss of arrows and the screams of the dying. Droth be praised." And what you can do with these cards is they've got a little number on them, and they've got these little pips on them that tell you how powerful the card is. Now, when you play a card like this, it's not praying to Droth to come save you or something like that. Instead, these cards represent a chance to role play the gods themselves. So you can play this card and say, Droth looks down and decides that he's going to intervene in this situation, and I'm going to tell you how. So, you know, if you've ever played with fate cards or anything like that, this is a way for the players to influence the direction of the game, maybe influence an important role, and they're able to do so within the story of how the gods are intervening in the world. And so, for example, this card actually gives some advice on something that you could use this card for. For example, play this card when you're engaged in battle against a force of 10 or more opponents. The sounds of battle reach a small, friendly force of warriors, and on your next turn, they arrive. They fight for your cause until the end of the battle, at which point they continue on their way. And so this is just one way you could use the card, but you could use the card any way that you want of equal power. Now, let's get to the Cool Name RPG part. What's fun is that, as you know, we're going to be converting Aetaltis to use Cool Name RPG rules so that the folks who want to play it with that system will be able to. We'll still have the 5th edition rules available. But with this, all this represents, it's very easy to convert this. You basically say those 6 points on the side, a 6-point card, you add 6 to your action score. Now, 6 is the largest card there is. You know, most of them are 1 or 3. Here's a 1-point card, a Veil, right? And so all you need to do if you're using these cards in your World of Aetaltis game and you're playing it in Cool Name RPG is you're able to play the cards exactly like they are. Just a 1 point means add 1 to your action score. And that's how it works. Or you could maybe take one off a difficulty score if that's the way you wanted to play it, and you can tell a good story around it, right? That's a big part of these cards as well. The way we use them is we typically will pass out a number of cards at the start of the game, usually one or two, because we don't want it to go overboard. There's some rules about whether you get to keep them from session to session, but we're not going to go into that here. One other neat thing about it is that if two people have draw cards, for example, they can add them together to create a more powerful effect. And again, this is could be a straight up action score bonus. So it's very, very easy to use these in your Cool Name RPG game. I encourage you to give it a try. It's a lot of fun and it adds a lot of character to the game. The toughest thing I found is people wrapping their heads around, I'm not praying to the gods to come save me. It's the gods choosing to intervene on my behalf. And the best use of cards in the way I envision it is no one can be 100% sure that was the gods. Was that really Droth that sent those soldiers to you? Well, a true adherent of Droth is going to be certain that that was the direct intervention of their god. But for someone else, they'll be like, look, it was luck, right? But it's that idea, the idea that the gods are interfering in the lives of mortals. So that's something cool that we were playing with and had a lot of fun with on our last adventure in our Cool Name RPG game. We also wrapped up not a little sooner than I expected, but wrapped up the first adventure. The first adventure I created for the group to play through in our Cool Name RPG game was an adventure that was based in Port Vale, which is a city of thieves and criminals and miscreants. The heroes had been traveling by ship, and the ship broke and had some sort of horrible damage to it in a storm, and it limped into harbor, at which point the captain got out and said, you know what? I don't have any money left. The ship is beyond repair. Sorry, everybody. Trip's over. I can't take you to Salenthia where you were planning to go. And the heroes just find themselves stranded in Port Vale. So the first thing they think to themselves is, how do we get some money? Because they spent all their money for this ship's passage. This guy doesn't have any money to give them. They have no way really to recover. So they think to themselves, well, what do people do for money? Well, there's an arena, but nobody really wants to become a gladiator. That seems like a little extreme. So they decide to go into the jungles looking for ancient ruins and treasure. And so they head into the Zemayan jungle. And the adventure is a series of encounters that take place within the Zemayan jungle. Now, let me go ahead and I'm going to pull up here some of my notes. Sorry, I meant to have this here, but to be fair, I should tell you that I got so carried away looking at stock art, getting ready, that I kind of lost track of time a little bit. And it's possible I, at the last moment, realized how close it was to start time. So I didn't really have time to get everything out in time to show it all to you, but I can still walk you through. I still have everything here for you. It just takes me a minute to pull things up. So I created a series of encounters. Now, you can create encounters that happen in a certain order to create your adventure. But in this case, I wanted a series of encounters that could happen in whatever order fit with the way the players approached the adventure. And so I created these series of encounters. Some of these encounters were puzzles. Some of these encounters were adventures or were action encounters, and others were combat encounters. We also had a few social encounters dropped in and opportunities for those as well. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is in a Cool Name RPG adventure, you're going to get the most richness by creating a rich variety of encounter types. If every encounter is a combat, that might be good for some groups, but for most groups, that's going to get a bit repetitive, right? Cool Name RPG, though, gives you a chance to create action, dice rolling, storytelling encounters for any type of a situation. And so I began by thinking what sort of things would be really cool in a jungle adventure. Now, one of the first things I did, and I don't have the link to it, I'll try to find it and post it later. There was a great Reddit discussion about jungle encounters. And there were a couple from there that I was like, oh, yeah, we got to do that one. That one's pretty cool. Like there was an encounter where you encounter a huge caravan of wagons abandoned in the middle of the jungle. That's it. No people, no living things, no oxen, nothing, just wagons sitting there as if everyone just walked away. I thought that was an incredibly cool encounter. And so a couple of those I used in my adventure. But I also thought to myself, I want to have some combat. So what could they fight? What are some things that they might fight? And that's where we came up with the encounter I told you guys about a few weeks ago, the encounter with the tar pit. I always love the idea of venom. I'm not necessarily a huge Venom fan, or Carnage. That's not necessarily my favorite characters, but the concept of being overtaken by this ooze and that ooze taking on your life is something very creepy to me. And in a world where where corruption runs rampant in some places, this seemed like a great concept for me to play with. So we created the ooze pool, this pool of tar that the players are attracted to when they hear the cry of a beast in pain and suffering. And they come over and see the deer being sucked into it. And then as they turn to leave, they're like, well, that didn't really work. And they give up and they turn to leave. And then the thing claws its way back out of the tar. But it's not the same creature it was when it went in, because now it's this thing that's basically sort of based on black ooze, but can reach out with pseudopods and sort of has thing-like movements from the movie The Thing, where it's like cracking its bones as it walks because it can do whatever it needs to move. So it became very fun. Now that was actually set up, that combat, not as individual opponents. I set that up as a single challenge score. And then I had an escalating challenge score. And what that represented was the longer they fought, the more things crawled out of the ooze. Now, the good news for them is that they were able to defeat the thing relatively quickly, and they only had a few opponents coming at them. But they weren't attacking each opponent individually necessarily. They were attacking the overall challenge score to defeat the monsters of the ooze. And in some ways, it made sense from a story perspective as well, because really this ooze was a single sentient being with various creatures it was sending out to attack them. But it worked very well from the perspective of telling a story where this scene is escalating without having to throw more and more actual monsters with full sets of stats and everything else into the game. Worked very, very nicely. And so that was one of the early scenes we had. And one of the reasons I started with that is that everybody, when they get new characters, they want to fight something. Now, shortly before this, we actually had a scene that I also probably mentioned, the Allosaur, where they fought against this creature that came stomping out of the forest, right? And they had to fight it. That was also a very fun combat scene. Now, in that one, we literally had a single creature that was their enemy. Now, I will say that in this adventure scene, in this combat encounter, one of the things that I made sure of is that I knew that this creature was way beyond their skill level to defeat single-handedly, right? These are the equivalent of first level characters in the playtest, and I knew that this was going to be pretty tough for them. And so when they encounter the creature, it's attacking a caravan, and the caravan guards are trying to fight it off, but you can tell that they're hopelessly outclassed. They need some adventurers to help. And so what this allowed the heroes to do was to fight the creature, but I had a backup as the GM where I could have the caravan guards come in and do a little more if I needed to make sure that this wasn't an impossible encounter for the heroes. Now, we did add some flavor to it. So when you're building the encounter, obviously you want your primary challenge, the thing that embodies the challenge score of the difference between success and failure within the counter. We had a group of prisoners who were chained up behind this wagon, and they were being forced to go out into the jungle to search for spices. And this created a extra challenge for the heroes, because now they have this group of chained, helpless individuals who could become casualties of this battle if they aren't careful how they play it out. So it creates another challenge point for them, in which it makes the adventure more fun, the encounter more fun than just beating on a dinosaur over and over again. Instead, now you've got this other thing. You've got people screaming and trying to pull on their chains, and you've got guards torn between whether they go after the prisoners or they go after the dinosaur. It creates this sort of fun dynamic that gives the story some richness. And so that was another combat encounter that we had. Now, one of the nice things there is we got to see the use of a lot of different types of attacks in this challenge encounter. So, for example, in this combat encounter, one of the things is one of the heroes waved his torch at it repeatedly, right? He said, look, I've worked with animals. I'm going to try to scare this thing off. That was fantastic. He wasn't really burning it. That's not what you're doing to the creature, but he was using his abilities to sort of scare this creature off and make a big deal and make a lot of noise. One time he used that to pull the creature away from the prisoners. And so that was one of our early encounters. So right off the bat, I've got a couple of adventure encounters mixed in there, or combat encounters mixed in. Now, that the dinosaur one was the very first real encounter of the game after some role playing, just because we like to role play to get to know everyone's characters and everything at the beginning. But it's good to put something like that in early on because everybody wants to roll some dice and fight something. I mean, fighting monsters is part of the fun of fantasy gaming. And so, doesn't hurt to lean into that a little bit. Some of the other encounters we had a running encounter. Now, this one's a little bit weird because it laced between some of the other encounters. What it was a monkey that would show up during other encounters to steal their food. Now, that alone is not a huge deal, but it certainly is an ongoing threat to their long-term survival, because if the monkey steals their food while they're busy doing other things like fighting the slime beast or fighting the dinosaur, eventually they're going to need food and they're not going to have it. And they recognize this, and this monkey would jump out, it would grab some of their food and would run off into the jungle. And they were getting very frustrated with it until during one of their encounters, the monkey takes a bunch of their food and throws something into the box where the food was and runs off into the woods. What is it? It's a clue. It's a hint to the overall arc of this adventure. This adventure was about finding a lost shrine deep within the jungle. And this stone is marked with markings of a culture unlike any they'd ever seen before. Now, not particularly important at that moment, but in combination with the other encounters, it becomes an important clue as they go along. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So start with some combat, create some other encounters in between. And one of those is a ship in the middle of the jungle, which is what's kind of cool about it. They're going along and they find an anchor on the ground. And this encounter is all about exploration. This is an exploration encounter where they want to try to gather as much information as they can. And to do that, they need to overcome the challenge score. And the challenge score in this case represents this flying ship that has crashed up in the treetops. And they climb up there to get it. But the problem, as you might imagine, is that this flying ship is carefully balanced and it creaks and moves. And so every time they're hunting around the ship to find things, that ship is creaking, and eventually that ship is going to fall. And so you have an encounter where they have a certain number of actions before the encounter ends. And so you're creating a cool encounter where they're exploring here, but they have to hit the challenge score to find the clues before everything is over. And the primary clue on this ship, and I'm not going to go into the full details of the encounter, the primary clue is a medallion worn by one of the people on the ship, which has the same sort of markings as that stone the monkey ends up leaving for them eventually, creating this thread of some sort of strange culture that must be out in this jungle someplace that you're getting connections to. Now, you can still do a lot of the normal RPG stuff. For example, one of the heroes, although it's not the primary goal of the defeating the challenge score for this, one of the characters goes into the captain's quarters and rummages through his clothes because, you see, he didn't have enough money to buy a cloak at the start of the adventure. And so he's been looking everywhere for a cloak. Well, sure enough, he digs through and finds a cloak among the captain's items, and he's just absolutely thrilled while the other characters are off doing the main story, rolling against the challenge score each round to see if they can figure out what caused the ship to crash, why it crashed here. And at different levels of reducing the challenge score, I gave them additional clues. So, for example, a clue was the logbook of the ship. A clue was the item hanging around the neck of the skeleton they find in the back of the hold. All of these things I have crop up as they're doing the exploration. Now, here's something that I think is interesting, is that you might hear this and think, that's a little artificial, right? If they're not looking in the right place, they're not going to find it. Well, you can do it that way. Although what makes the adventure fun is progressing the story and rewarding characters for good ideas, rewarding characters for heroic actions. And so if they make a heroic action and their character succeeds and it lowers the challenge score enough, there's no reason the skeleton can't be in the next room they explore. There's no reason it can't be there. That's not which room it in is not the key part of this encounter. Now, in another encounter, picking the right room might be very important. And I might want to make sure that say like, nope, sorry, you didn't go in the right room. You don't find it. But in this case, the key was trying to get as many clues as possible before the ship fell down out of the trees and crashed down onto the jungle floor. So that was another type of encounter, an exploration encounter, or perhaps an interaction encounter, you might think about it, depending on how you want to think through the encounter type, which we're still working through. So we have that, and that came up at one point. We've got our combat encounters scattered in with some bits scattered through. We also had the ongoing exploration, where there are exploration moments in between. They are following a map, trying to find their way through the jungle and trying to figure out how to get to this place that they're trying to reach. Now, this in itself is a fun encounter because it's not as simple as simply saying, all right, roll to see if you find your way, roll to see if you find your way. No, it really isn't, because what's happening is we have a constraint, and that constraint is food. The heroes might be able to find food in the jungle, but none of them are really jungle survivors, not the sort of characters they're playing, which makes it especially fun that they're all going to the jungle together. But that's not really their thing. They did try to do a little foraging, and it worked out okay, and they ended up eating some little crayfish and grubs, which didn't really fill them up. So they realized that, yeah, we've got a time constraint to find this and get back with whatever treasure we find. And so whenever you have one of those exploration encounters in between, the time it takes them to reduce the challenge score means that they may not make it as far as they want to make it. So let's say we have a challenge score of 15, and that's the day's challenge score to make progress in the adventure. Well, for this encounter, today's an exploration encounter, they're going to make some navigation rolls, some intellect action checks to try to find their way through here, or perhaps awareness if the GM feels it's appropriate. But how are they going to have better chances? Well, first off, the party bought a map on their way. I think that was great. They spent some of their very precious coin to buy this map, and they have a +1 on their action scores for that. Another times they realized they couldn't quite see where the sun was, and so one of the characters climbed up into this tree and looked out over the treetops to try to figure out where the sun was, and was calling down directions to the group below so they could plot a course. There's another bonus to the action score, right? They're doing an assist, and so you get a bonus there. And so each of these things was the party working together to find ways to more quickly reduce this action score so they don't end up stuck in the jungle for too long, eating grubs and crayfish out of the river that they find. So another type of encounter. So we've got our combat encounters. You have our interaction encounters where they're sort of exploring and looking around. You've got their exploration encounters where they're making their way through the jungle. The other thing that we have, and this is something that we didn't actually get to because they decided to turn back with some of the treasure they found, which is fine. It was a cool idea. One of the things that they ended up doing was there's a bridge, right? And the water has rushed through this bridge, and it has overtaken it. So you have this rope bridge now, and there's water, and every so often it surges over the rope bridge. And so what this created was an action scenario. How do you reach the other side without being swept off the bridge? Now, this was designed with a certain place the characters would end up if they got swept off the bridge, a place they could come back. So it's not an instant death type of scenario, which is not generally fun for most people. So they have to make their way to the other side of the bridge. So that was one of our action encounters. We also had a chase encounter, which they were trying. One of the times that the monkey came after he dropped that clue, they waited for him to come again, and then they chased him because they wanted to know where he got that strange stone. So they chased him through the jungle, racing against time, trying to keep up with that monkey before he escaped from them. Every time the monkey ran, it would increase the challenge score. Every time they made it, it would go back down again. And so they had to keep trying to make more progress than the monkey did. And they finally caught up with the monkey and managed to find another clue to their adventure, including a page of a book that matched the map that they had. And so this was another action scene for them, chasing the monkey through the woods. And so all these different encounters were built to create this overall adventure. Oh, one other encounter I do want to mention was the landslide. Because of all the rain, they were on a landslide, and this land was sliding down this hill. The ground was basically with trees falling beside them. A great action adventure scene like any movie. And what they had to do wasn't stop the landslide, was just not get hurt by it, not get buried by it. And so their challenge throughout the action checks that they were making were to stay atop the landslide and sort of ride it down to where it was going. So, just an example of a number of the different types of encounters created and how you can use Cool Name RPG to craft these encounters around the idea of a challenge score. It doesn't have to be the traditional, it's this difficulty to climb the cliff and this difficulty to jump over here and this difficulty. Instead, you wrap it up into a rich scene that takes the characters through the adventure and allows them to draw on their strengths and their abilities. So the wizard can use their magic, and the explorer can swing by his whip, and the acrobat can jump from branch to branch, and the one warrior, the only warrior in the group, can stomp through and smash things as he goes along. Building out an adventure that way allows you to have a very rich, very fun story that you'll have a ton of fun with your friends on. Now, all these encounters, I do intend to release them at some point in a form that you guys can try them out yourselves. And so I just haven't had the time to do that yet, but I'm working on it. But I hope that this will help you as you're going along to understand a little bit more about how to build out a Cool Name RPG adventure through a series of individual encounters going through. All right, so that's my talk about Cool Name RPG. I've got 2 more things to go through, and we're already at the half-hour mark, so I'm going to try not to take too long because I know everyone's busy and you don't have all night to sit here and listen to me yammer on. So first, my usual hydration as the halfway point so I can keep talking because it's a lot of talking to do. All right, so next we're going to talk briefly about publishing with DriveThruRPG. Now, one of the things that I always told folks I would tell you about is what the process has been like of making Cool Name and share some of the knowledge that we acquired along the way. Now, granted, we acquired a lot of this knowledge prior to Cool Name. Our very first book we put out was called The Temple of Modron, and then it later became The Heroes of Thornwall as it got expanded. That book we published, Heroes of Thornwall, through a local printer. I really dreamed that I'd be able to do this through a local printer. And I'll tell you, the book was gorgeous. That original version of the book, it was just turned out just beautiful. That printer really put their heart and soul into it. From the perspective of someone who has to pay to have these books made, it was really expensive. I struggled to cover the costs of that. We did not even break even. There was a loss on our side, which we were fine with because we were building a company. But it is tough to find local printers unless you can print in really large quantities, which most people making a game aren't in a position to drop $30,000 to buy copies of their own book right off the bat, right? That can be really tough, even if you go with some sort of overseas printer. Right. There are a lot of printers in China that can print books, and it's exceptional, much, much cheaper. And it's actually, that is the cheapest way to do it per book. Now, the problem is you still have to buy a few thousand books. And that's really tough for a lot of independent book game makers, right? Game designers. So there is a solution, and that's DriveThruRPG. Now, I know there are other ways to print books on demand, but I like DriveThruRPG for a couple reasons. One, that's where tons of us go to look for books. 2, they know what we're doing. They know what a role-playing game is. They know what our goals are. They know what we want it to look like. They understand the games that we're making, and they can help make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're creating the sort of book we want to make. The third reason, and I'll talk about this a little more after, is that my God, are they awesome to work with. They are an amazing group of people to work with. I've had nothing but positive experiences, and we'll talk a little more. But I'm not going to go through every step of how to publish a book with them. But what I do want to show you are a couple of interesting points, things that might help you as you're looking at publishing your own book. So first off, I want to show you the print calculator. This is a very useful tool. See this here? Super handy. Now, down below, you can see they've got all of the pricing, how much it costs per page, and, for different types of hardcovers, perfect bound, case bound. Perfect bound is just a book like think of an adventure module or Not a magazine's not a great example, but I wish I had a copy here with me. But most modern modules that come at paperback, those are going to be like perfect bound. And then case bound is you're talking about your hardcovers, right? Your typical hardcover. And there's more details to that in what it all means. But honestly, it's probably not enough to really matter to most people. So I'm not going to go into that right now. If you guys want to hear more about it, let me know in the comments and I'll happily go into more detail later. But you don't even need to worry about all that because right up here, we've got something fantastic, which is the calculator. I can go in here and get a very good idea of what this book is going to cost me. So let's say I'm going to do a hardcover and I'm going to start with standard color. And I'm going to say large. Large is your standard RPG sized book, right? Small is where you get into sort of the digest forms like the Fate style Savage Worlds books. So standard color, large. And we're going to say 132 pages. You'll notice books are in increments of 4 because that's how many pages there are. And you end up paying for that number of pages anyway, even if you're not using them all. So we're just going to put that in 132 pages. I calculate it. And here's what it's going to cost me to print it. Now, this is amazing because now if I'm doing a Kickstarter or I'm trying to figure out how much money this is going to cost me to make, here you know what it's going to cost. This is your printing cost. If I print this overseas, I'm probably going to get a price that, I don't know, less than half of that, which is awesome once you're big enough to pay for it. But when you're just starting out, this is the way to go. It's awesome and it's easy, right? So there we go. That's an example, 132 pages. Now, standard color in DriveThruRPG is a matte paper that is not glossy. I'm going to tell you, as much as I love the glossy pages, I'm someone who takes a lot of notes in my books. So I really, really like the standard color paper. It doesn't jump out quite as much. And you're going to need to work with your artist to make sure that your images are bright enough. Because one thing a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't make your images bright enough, they're just going to darken down to be blobs on the first print. Our first prints of our books, that's what happened to us. And we sat there and went, what did we do wrong? We had no idea. And it took us a while to figure it out because none of us had done this before. But yeah, you need to make sure that it's really going to pop. You also have to make sure that your art is in the right format, CMYK for print, because you don't want to go with RGB for print. Again, we could talk about art another day. But the point being is that the standard color is a little darker, a little duller than what you get with the premium color. That said, it's a pretty good format. It's the format game books were for many, many years. And if you're like me and you like to write notes, glossy paper is kind of terrible for that. So next up, let's look at premium color. Premium color is where we get extra fancy. Let me see if I can figure out why it's not. Oh, there we go. Put our 132 pages and calculate. Look at that, $25. So it almost doubles the cost of the book in terms of the printing cost. If you think about the prices of books, and let's say the book is, $39.99, or, at this price point, maybe $34.99 if you're looking at 132 pages, you might think, well, that's kind of awesome. I'm making like $9. Yeah, but if you need to pay back if you need to come up with the money that you paid out to the artists and to the layout people and to everything else that costs money and pay your daily bills, because another thing we could talk about sometime is what it costs to keep a game company up and running without publishing any books. There are expenses involved, and so you want to give this some thought and say to yourself, is this the right way to go? Now, I don't know, and what I can't tell you is I can't tell you for sure whether or not standard color is a detriment to selling books. We've been successful selling ours, but I know some people just swear by the premium color. It's kind of nice to see the art really pop off the page. That's really beautiful. So this is something that I really think you guys should know about. You can take a look at it. Anyone can reach this. You don't have to be a publisher to get to this, I don't believe. No, I'm not even logged in right now. So anybody can get to this and you can run the numbers for yourself and get an idea of what it would cost you to make that book that you want to make. Let's see. We have one comment that says, wait, what? You're supposed to pay your creators? Yes, right? That's crazy. Weirdly enough, it's super important to actually pay the people who make the things that you're selling. It's kind of funny. We probably should have a whole talk about that sometime about the importance and what it costs to pay people to do this work. The reality is that it's too easy to fall into the habit of saying, we just people just want to do this. They love making RPGs. You've actually heard some larger game companies make comments about how, well, people love to work for us, so we don't necessarily have to pay them that much. That is wrong in a million ways. The reality is that people need to be able to put food on the table. And some way, one way or another, you have to be reimbursing people for their work. That might be cash, or that might be a stake in the company that you're building. That's another way that you can do it. One of these days, I'm going to do a little speech about Pie Slicer, teach you guys about that. It's a startup tool that allows you to build a company where people earn shares, percentage share of the company as you build it, which is kind of cool. All right, so enough of that though. Let me talk a little bit more about Drive-Thru RPG. So one of the first things that happens with Drive-Thru RPG is that once you put your book in there, you have to get a proof of the book printed and sent to you before it can go live. So that book you want to look at very carefully. You want to make sure that you haven't made any major mistakes in how dark the art is, if the art is too dark, if things didn't come out, if things come out pixelated, right? We had one time had a bunch of pages come out pixelated because there was a problem with the inserting the images into the file. And once they hit print, they came out pixelated. And if we didn't do our proof, we wouldn't know. Plus, you're required to do a proof by Drive-Thru RPG before it can go live, which is pretty darn important. The other thing the proof does is it lets Drive-Thru RPG verify that your book is in the right format, right? The format is super important. They have templates for this. You'll want to work with someone who knows how to build things in the right format, especially if you're going to print. If you're just going to PDF, it's actually quite a bit easier because it's not vital that you know what bleed is on the outside, like how far out the pages go. You don't have to worry quite as much. But if you're going to print, there's a lot of rules. And Drive-Thru RPG will provide those for you. They also have people who can help you if you run into problems. And that's one of the things that I really loved is that whenever we had a problem with Drive-Thru RPG and something got rejected or sent back to us, they were so happy to help us, right? We had a problem with the UPC symbol on the back. And we're like, we don't know what's wrong. We did everything we thought we were supposed to do. And they were on it and helped us. Not only did they help us, it turned out we did it right. But what it turned out is it was being rejected improperly by the company that does the actual printing. And rather than me having to deal with that company, Drive-Thru RPG did it. And then they came back and said, okay, it's fixed. You're good. You can get your proof. So another great touch here that another reason it's really nice to go through Drive-Thru RPG. Keep in mind, though, that if you have print books and PDF books, those are two separate files. Those aren't going to be the same file. You're going to need to have your own, you have a separate, different sort of file for the print book. It's got again, I'm not going to go into all the details of that here, but simply to say you need to have someone who knows how to build the file correctly for you. So when you send it out to them. So finally, here's the big thing. Do you remember when I showed this a second ago? I'll show it again. See this here, how it shows US printing, UK printing? One thing that is a nightmare is the cost of shipping. If I'm fulfilling a Kickstarter, we have to sort of figure out what shipping costs. If I have to ship to the UK, it's going to cost me an arm and a leg to ship there. If I have to print here and ship there, it's just crazy. Good luck if you have to print to Australia and you have to ship it yourself to Australia. You're spending $40, $50, $60 to do that. Not to mention VAT and export charges and all of those things. So here's the beauty of Drive-Thru RPG. They have printers in different regions and they can print and ship from those regions. So your shipping cost is significantly lower if you're going through Drive-Thru RPG than you're ever going to spend. Now, a lot of times shipping costs is passed on to the backers or to the people who are purchasing, but do you really want to charge 3 times as much to folks for buying your book through you versus through Drive-Thru RPG? Probably not. It's going to be really hard to convince people to buy your $35 to $50 book if they also have to spend $30 on shipping at the end of it, right? So another great way, another advantage of doing your printing through Drive-Thru RPG. It's just really great, and you don't have to worry about any of the business of shipping. They also ship books great. And if someone gets a book that's not right, if something's wrong with it, we have seen amazing. I've gotten amazing service, and our customers have gotten amazing service when they've written the drive-through RPG, said, "Hey, I got it," and the sides all crushed in and everything. They went, "Okay, we'll send you another book," and they sent it to them, and that was that. All set, no problems. People are super happy, and in the end, it makes you look good. So, again, can't say enough about drive-through RPG and the value of using them if you're going to be printing your books on demand. We learned it the hard way. We tried a few different methods, and for us, at least for now, this is like the premier way for us to get books out. It makes it super easy, and you can do amazing stuff. All right. So, last thing I want to talk about. It says, do you have any experience using drive-through fiction? And if indie published authors might get those shipping benefits there? Yes, absolutely. This is true for drive-through fiction as well. Drive-through fiction is the fiction publishing. And I've done a lot with fiction. I've written fiction. I've done anthologies. Our first edition of the Champions of Ataltis, the anthology of Ataltis stories we put out, was done with a local printer, local being within Michigan here. The reprint, when we went back to print with it, we went through drive-through RPG. And again, you get the same benefits there of being able to get a regional printer, regional shipping costs, avoiding that and trying to figure out how to calculate that. So you don't, because one of the problems if you don't do it right, when it shows up, the person will go to pick it up at the post office and they'll say, great, you own $30 in export or import charges. The person's like, what? I already paid $50 for the book. I know another 30 in import fees. You do not want to mess with that stuff. Let drive-through RPG do what they do best, which is print and ship books. You don't ever have to worry about that. But yeah, for drive-through fiction, same thing. It's great. And in fact, these cards printed through drive-through cards. Our Game Master screen is printed through drive-through RPG. And really all it is 8.5 by 11 size cards you can slide into a Game Master screen. And so, yeah, any type of thing that you need right now, they have a service for it. Now, what I would love to see, and I don't think they've added this yet, are large posters. So you can do large poster maps. They hit that one, and I will be thrilled because I love big poster maps, and I would love to include those. All right. So last of all for tonight, I'm going to tell you about something that I ignored for a long time. Have you heard of Sweet Tooth, right? The show on Netflix about animal kids. All right, I'm not an animal person. I don't like animals in general, and I'm not a fan of animal people stories. However, I do like post-apocalyptic quite a bit, and I do like sort of stories with a almost fairy tale vibe laced with reality. So, for example, I don't know if you ever watched Pushing Daisies or what was the one where you'll know what it is if I tell you, but she got hit with a toilet seat from the International Space Station and killed her, and she became a Grim Reaper. Dead Like Me, right? It has this sort of almost weird fairy tale vibe to it, but it is realistic. And Sweet Tooth, to put it another way, if you've seen The Last of Us, which amazing show with amazing acting, I'm going to give you one of those questions that you always had on all the standardized tests. The Expanse is to Star Wars as The Last of Us is to Sweet Tooth. All right. So keep that in mind. That's sort of the vibe. It's almost post-apocalyptic opera. I don't know if that's a thing, but it should be, because that's kind of what this felt like. I'll tell you, this was an amazing story. Pulls at your heartstrings, amazing moments of adventure, characters that you just can't get enough of. Give it a shot. Now, if you watch 2 or 3 episodes and you're not getting into it, it's okay to abandon it because it probably isn't for you. But if you've got even the slightest interest, keep going, because the story just builds and grows, and it's heading into the final season now, which they've said is definitely coming. Only 2 seasons now, 3rd one's coming. A great, great series. Oh, and I should mention it's based on a comic book by Jeff Lemire. Now, I haven't read the comic yet. I have only seen the show. And so I'm sure there's someone out there going like, oh, they ruined the comic when they made the show. And to you, I'm sorry. I know your pain. But I will say that I loved watching this show, and I've been ignoring it for years. And I hope that if you like post-apocalyptic and fantasy and science fiction and all those things sort of mixed together, check out Sweet Tooth. It's a ton of fun. All right, folks, we have spent a good, 51 minutes talking about role-playing games and movies and everything else. So thank you all for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. In the meantime, like I said, I am gone for a few weeks. So I will be off in England for a few weeks. But I will be back in first week of April. So watch for me then. We have a lot going on, and watch the Kickstarter update that I'm going to be posting soon. It's going to talk about the next release of the playtest rules, when those are coming, and give you some more of our timetable for getting us to the final book. So thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a great night.